I was at the ALA conference in Las Vegas. I was speaking there, and then I was speaking about marketing, but they have panels about budgeting and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Uh, I mean, you've been running your firm for several years, so you have like a track record. It's easier for you to probably budget. But can you talk about how people could do that if they're starting to get into it? And because how do you make a reliable budget? Because everything is just so crazy, kind of changes and all that kind of stuff. Do you have a team, like a company that you hire? Tell me more about how you do budgeting.
Well, I do it myself, which has served me well. But I take a very, very, very conservative approach. And that's always sort of helped. Like, for example, I've been fortunate in the practice over the past 10 years where we've had some really robust years. I've kept a lot of retained earnings. I like to have a buffer. So I have a special account where I keep enough capital to have the firm run for 3 months, even if we weren't to collect a dollar.
Hmm.
So that gives me like a lot of a safety net in my
Yeah.
opinion. And like honestly, one of the things that I'm proudest about during the pandemic, when we hit that in April, May of 2020, a lot of law firms were reducing benefits, were laying people off, or furloughing people. We didn't have to cut any of that stuff. We were able to keep everybody's salary static. We didn't have to let anybody go, and we were able to maintain our benefit contribution level. So for me, the first thing I always look at is, you know, creating a buffer zone in there. Some people do it with a line of credit, which is completely okay as well. If you're just getting, started and your bank is willing to give you a line of credit, that can serve the same sort of mechanism. Debt is not necessarily a bad thing, but what you have to understand is the cost of serving the debt and how it impacts your ability to continue to generate revenue for the firm. To
Hmm.
your specific question about budgeting, first you have to look at your clientele. You have to look at your clientele to say to yourself, okay, what aspect of this is subject to recession? Which aspect of my clientele are institutional? And what aspects of my clientele are not really affected by recession? So if you have a family-based practice, which is primarily you're doing like marriage-based cases, K1s, that kind of thing, that's not really affected so much by a downturn in the economy, like somebody that's looking to hire H-1B workers or do transfers. So you got to put that in perspective because that will allow you to start doing your forecasting. If you do business immigration, you have to look and say, okay, well, do we have corporate institutional clients? Do we have retainer agreements with companies that you can anticipate year over doing a certain amount of immigration work? And you have to look to see what their public announcements are and what kind of questions they're asking. Like, okay, to understand where their trends are going to be. People that do a removal practice, you're less affected by the economy and more affected by the government and policies, and that becomes your real existential threat to the organization is how those things change. Um, so, I think there's a multitude of factors. Being a lawyer, especially an immigration lawyer, is an interesting one from a budgeting perspective, John, because not only do you have to take into account the economy, but you have to take into account the government policy.
Yeah.
And like the way we adjusted our practice during the Trump years versus how we're handling it with Biden, a lot of that has to do based on what's coming out of the White House. What language are they using? What sort of rhetoric? Um, so yeah, I think it's law is a trickier, especially immigration law is a trickier field to budget from within. Um, but certainly it's not impossible. You just have to have a multifaceted analysis. When I look at my monthly data, I'm always looking at year over reports. So I'll look back 2 or 3 years to see where the trends are. Also, understanding your fixed and variable cost is extremely important. Variable costs you can turn down. If the economy is not humming and you're spending a lot of money on marketing, you can turn that down if you're not contractually obligated to do so. Um, you can cut down on travel. Like, before you actually get into a posture where you're letting workers go, you have to understand which of your expenses are you're committed to, like rent, like you can't really get out of it, versus things where you can sort of forego it for a little while until things shore up a little bit.
Is payroll something you can adjust, not let people go, but say, okay, either no bonuses or the salary decreases, or is it one of those things that's fixed once the number's out?
I mean, a lot of when we saw the first recession come along, it was quite common for people to furlough, put bench people, which you can't do if you're hiring an H-1B worker, by the way, um, or reduce hours. Like Or like so a lot of law firms, you don't have to have everybody be a salaried employee. You can have some hourly employees and you can toggle down their hours.
Hmm.
Um, I think it's a tricky thing within a firm to lower salary. I think your idea about saying, look, like with bonuses, like, hey guys, like we can't do bonuses this year because of the economy. I think that that's one thing where, bonus has this sort of connotation of not something that's necessarily guaranteed. When you start messing with people's salaries, especially in light of all the inflation that we have going on, I think it's a recipe for, resentment, losing staff quickly.
Yeah.
And, I would try to avoid effectuating wages at all costs. Now, it could get to a point within the legal industry where law firms are reducing salaries as like a common aspect. And if you keep an idea on the trends, like certainly you can look at that as a mechanism of reducing overhead costs, but you don't want to do it knowing that this person has other alternatives at other firms.
Yeah.